Hello. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Wesley Bugg. I'm with Reaching Our Sisters Everywhere, and as you can see, Reaching Our Brothers Everywhere, which stands for breastfeeding and community engagement. We're trying to focus on reducing infant mortality. But today I'm here to introduce Kenn Harris, who is a Senior Project Director of NICHQ, which stands for the National Institute for Children's Health Quality. He has been with Healthy Start for about 30 years. Um, Healthy Start was started in 1991, which was the same year that I was born. So Kenn has seen many transitions and evolutions of Healthy Start and is still working to make that a better place. And he'll talk more about that. One thing I did want to mention, he is the father of one son, proud father of a son, but he is a mentor of many. So you all will hear from him, his wisdom. I want to leave a lot of time for questions and for his presentation. So with no further ado, Kenn Harris.
Thank you so much, Wesley. And I want to begin by just saying thanks to you. Thanks to everyone at the Cheering for Champions conference. It is really an honor to be here. I've been excited since I've been asked, knowing that I'll be hanging out with some folks that I consider friends in this space, and also the opportunity to connect with others. And so thank you so much for having me. And I'm excited to share with you today. And just wanted you to know that a lot of what I've come to, I guess, preparing for this, has been so much reading and research that I've done just to be prepared for today. But I really want to acknowledge the Works Progress Administration for the many letters and notes that I had the opportunity to read, along with those from the Freedmen's Bureau that was established in 1965, which really was responsible for supporting and helping those 4 million slaves that were just in transition. And so I'm really excited to be here today, and a lot I want to share. I'm going to share some things that might tempt you to characterize or pathologize me with those familiar narratives that make it easy to dismiss what I'm saying. But I ask that you really resist that temptation. I may say some things also that might trigger you for whatever reason, but I want to invite you to feel free to step away and take care of yourself. I want to be clear. I'm not enraged, but I am outraged when I think about the plight of Black people in this country and the struggles that we have, even as it concerns us today around Black breastfeeding. And as Wesley said, with my history, 30 years in MCH, I want to always declare that men have babies too. Men are concerned about their families too. And so I really encourage you to be present today, and I'll try to make it as entertaining as I can, educational, but it is an experience, and I myself will be in a process of going through the emotions as well as I think about this critical topic, as it's very personal to me. So thank you again. And I really want to talk about slavery's interruptions and Black family formation. And that's kind of where my heart is in my research, and what I plan to do for the rest of my life is to continue to tell the stories that were not told before, because slavery really interrupted the lives of Black family formation. And today, talking specifically about Black Mama's Milk Taken. And so again, I'm not enraged, I'm outraged, and I'm emotional. So just receive that, because I think it's outrageous to think that men aren't interested in this topic and don't want to be part of the conversations when it comes to taking care of our partners, our women, our mothers, our sisters, our aunties. And thank you so much, Raphael, for setting this up as well in the reference to the WHO, because again, that Lancet report from 2016, I think it's just great to look at. But again, early childhood development begins with the mother's breast. Exclusive breastfeeding, the best way to give your child a great start in life. And these are start in life, giving our kids a best start. And the evidence, again, being exclusive, that breastfeeding starts at birth, and it's the basis of this early childhood development. And by breastfeeding, moms have the opportunity to provide love and security to their children. Just the thought of that opportunity being taken away from her, taken away from a child, is just devastating in and of itself. And so think about the start. And when your start is messed up, then the rest of your life, it speaks for itself. So what happened to Mama's children who survived their first year of life without Mama's milk? And as we've heard, her love or her security. We know that there's struggle, and that struggle continues. Again, with infant mortality, trying to make it past that first year of life. But again, there's no protection, no foundation setting. Then life is just set up to be an all-out struggle. And to set context for our conversation today, I want us to pause and get centered and find yourself, get comfortable, plant both feet on the ground because we certainly want to go somewhere today. But let's start with a song that kind of takes us back into that place during slavery. And if you need to, close your eyes and let this wonderful advocate singer share with us what happened at an auctioneer's block. If you all will.
All this melanin is a gift from the God who made the earth. If you think it makes us less, check your thinking, you're absurd. All my brothers, all my sisters, check the mirror, know your worth. Keep your eyes on the prize, no more false advertisements. We got that joy, 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 and it feels like magic. We got that joy, we got that joy, we got that joy, and it feels like we got that joy, we got that joy, and it feels like magic. Even when they got them chains on us, you gotta say black joy. Even when they throw that shade on us, black joy. Even when they try to take from us, black joy. It's a joy we can't explain to you. Black joy. We got the joy. Black joy. On the inside, we got joy. We got that joy. And you can't take it. Get it away. Run it up, all the love they just show in the cut. All the lives that we lost, they just stopped. We struck it out. Couldn't be more wrong. We still standing real strong. Can't take our lives. Hear the people. Just hear our cry. No justice, no peace. No peace. You best believe the blind will see and take the knee. Cause we got that joy. We got that joy. We got that joy. We got that joy. We got that joy, and it feels like magic. Even when they got them chains on us, black joy. Even when they throw that shade on us, black joy. Even when they try to take from us, they got them chains on me. It's a joy we can't explain to you. No more chains holding me. Even when they got them chains on us, down, but black joy. Even when they throw that shade on us, black joy. Even when they try to take from us, black joy. It's a joy we can't explain to you. Black joy. We're gonna fly away, and we're gonna fly away. Let it ride out. Black joy, and we're gonna fly away. We got that joy, and you can't take it.
All righty. That's not the song I want you to hear just yet, but I think it's appropriate to start with this Black Joy. And as you heard, the song, it talks about being in chains, but not being held by those chains. And so it's fine that we've started with Black Joy, because certainly that's where my heart is, even as I face this work. And I know many colleagues, Black colleagues, colleagues of color, we face our work every day. And there's a joy that we have to have in order to do it successfully. So we will ride that wave of Black joy. And so I'm going to talk about historically as, again, reference to slavery and looking back in order to leap forward. Slavery was the reality of Black life for close to 250 years. And it's important to get that like kind of rooted in our thinking, right? There's 250 years of slavery in this country compared to the 156 years since slavery was legally abolished. And almost 100 of those years still allow legal discrimination. So the impact of that reality just didn't disappear because slavery ended and Civil Rights Act was passed in 1965. And so we talk about this legacy, this living legacy that still exists. So 402 years since slavery, but opportunities to parent your own children for only the past 150. And when we look closely at those last 150 years, we see also the challenges that policies and laws have put on people of color and Black people in particular when it comes to regards to raising our own children. So for a long time, there's been generation upon generation where Black families were just torn apart by slavery, torn apart post-slavery, and torn apart even today with policies that are in place that really push Black men, fathers, out of their family and out of their communities, and disparities and diseases and death also break up our families because we're not even living long enough to be there for one another. And when we think about Black mothers were often not allowed to nourish and raise their own babies, but they were forced to nourish to raise the babies of their enslavers. And so for most of our American history, Black breastfeeding meant wet nursing white babies, sometimes and most times at the expense of Black women's own children. And many children died that were neglected, because it wasn't just that the child did not get her breast milk, they didn't get her protection and they were not taken care of, or they were fed cow's milk or concoctions of milk with dirty water that caused sickness, disease, and many times death. And so when we think of the Black family and life as a slave, being enslaved in this country, the life was so hard, and many people talk about it. But when you really start looking into the depths of the history and hearing the stories, and what I love now about research and a lot of literature out there, we've captured pictures from those times, drawings, folks that capture what was happening, and also experiences in their own words, which are important. But slavery was an enforced system of sustained brutality, including acts and constant threats of torture, rape, and murder. So you talk about trying to keep people under control. This torture, rape, murder were all used, and it was constant, and it was sustained brutality throughout. And people, when they look at this history, they overlook that slavery affected millions of Blacks in America. And for many of us, it affects us even today. The legacy of slavery lives here, especially if you understand epigenetics. You feel something when another Black man gets gunned down. It affects Black people. Why? Because there's something alive in us that's threatening to kill us all the time. So people, when they look at history and slavery, they ignore the countless historic examples of resistance, rebellion, and escape. And many times that resistance or that rebellion led to lynchings or killings or terrible beatings. And this is such a horrible and atrocious history, but this is the reality of what slavery brought upon the Black family, and with regards to really impeding its ability to hold itself together. And again, when you look at this history, it's so whitewashed that they disregard this long tail legacy of slavery, where these oppressive laws, the over incarceration and violent acts of terrorism were all designed to keep people of color in their place. And it's hard to think of that as a distant thought, because when you think about what happens today and how systems try to keep us in our place. And this is a chart I'm sure many of you have seen as we talk about these 402 years, and just looking at the 402 in its totality. Here we are in struggle, unfairness. And again, I so appreciate being here and being part of Cheers, because again, addressing racism, addressing these health inequities, it's so important to get to the root of the problem in order to destroy that root, so we really can move forward and advance not only breastfeeding, but all other health conditions for improvement, the maternal mortality, the infant mortality. All of this is rooted in this history that Black people have in this country. And so this is just a chart, I think, that's so important to kind of have in our head when we think about the 402 years. You know, slavery, we know Jim Crow. There's a story about each of those, right? And I didn't have time to really share with you all the thoughts I have from some of the things that I've been reading over the last couple of years, but just looking at it, and you can pause and think about different things as you look over these books that have been written and just some of the realities of these last 402 years. But you will see when you look back on history, it's been whitewashed. So we have to go back and learn really what the truth is. And so our history has been eradicated, and not just for African Americans or Black people, but even our Native and Indigenous brothers and sisters. So this history, eradicating the history, the strengths have been distorted. So again, these stories that they've told about us, and these stories are not going to change as we let the lion continue to tell the story, because our strengths are distorted. And so we are looked at as weak and incompetent and shiftless and all the other things you've heard about this population. And then even our cultural values and traditions have been demonized and taken away from us, as it has been in other communities. But again, you take away that culture, you take away that connection, that community, then again, you're left to die. And so it's just important as we think about what's been written about these last few years and understanding the truth about our past in this country, history being eradicated, strengths being distorted, and a culture demonized. And so today I will be as harsh as truth, but as uncompromising as justice, as William Lloyd Garrison said. Because the truth is, something happened when we came to this land, and no one can deny that. We didn't want to talk about it before, but if we want to understand today and create a better future, we have to hear the truth and deal with the truth. And that's when you're going to see advancement, those that are embracing the realities and dealing with them so that we can move forward in honesty. So when it comes to Black breastfeeding, which I am so excited about, back in the 90s, as Wesley said, when I started with Healthy Start, I was also working with the March of Dimes when they introduced Men Have Babies Too, and I had started a whole men in breastfeeding group back in the 90s. And so Black breastfeeding has always stuck out for me, and I was excited even when my wife and I became pregnant with our first child, and we now our only son, Colton, and we had planned to breastfeed as well. But is there something special about Black people breastfeeding? Absolutely, and that's why we're having the conversation today. The answer is yes, there's something unique about Black breastfeeding, and several somethings. When you talk to the community, when you hear the people talking for themselves, you're going to hear a lot of things about the challenges with breastfeeding among Black people. And if you're familiar with the Upworthy blog, if you're not, I have the link is there when you get the slides, but definitely check it out. But I want to read to you this wonderful poem by Hess Love, who's an advocate and a community activist. And it's from the perspective of an enslaved Black woman nursing a white infant. I wish I dried up. I wish every drop of my milk slipped past those pink lips and nourished the ground, where the bones lay of my babies, starved while I fed their murderer. I wish I dried up, so the missus babies would dry up too and be brittle, so that I could crumble them to dust, return them to the ground, where all children of my bosom lay equal. Powerful words, chilling to the bone, in fact. When we think of enslaved women being forced to nurse masters' children and neglect their own, what they must have been thinking, what they wanted to say and could not say at the risk of death, but they kept things to themselves. They had to hold it together. Talk about toxic stress and trauma. That's what was going on in the lives of enslaved Black women forced to breastfeed. And so when we look at this history, again, whitewash history dismisses the trauma of Black women, especially wet nursing their enslaver's baby and how that carried on generations and generations. But you can't dismiss the trauma of that experience. Our cultural myths and the aftermath of slavery and wet nursing give breastfeeding an additional layer of shame in the Black community. And I'm saying stop. We have to stop. And for me, stop means there's just shame, there's trauma, there's oppression, and there's pain when we really get into this conversation about Black breastfeeding. And we need to stop the shame. We need to stop the trauma. We need to stop oppression. We need to stop the pain. That's a problem. So again, I'm not enraged, I'm just outraged. And I'm excited because we can do something about it, but we have to deal with our past. So what about Black families? When you look at Black families, we can't just look at her by herself. She's with family, she's with community, and that's part of the problem. We want to serve her in a fragmented way, but she is part of us. And as a Black male, a father, a partner, a man in MCH space, I'm saying we need to be concerned about the entire Black family because she's concerned. The Black mother is concerned about her family and her community. But when we look at the Black families, we see that shame, that trauma, that oppression, and pain coming in different ways. It's very interesting because President Johnson in 1965, at a commencement address at Howard University, a historical Black college, I want to read this to you. 200 years ago in 1765, he said, 9 assembled colonies first joined together to demand freedom from an arbitrary power. For the first century, we struggled to hold together the first continental union of democracy in the history of man. 100 years ago, 1865, following a terrible test of blood and fire, the compact of the union was finally sealed. Hear this. For a second century, we labored to establish a unity of purpose and interest among many groups which make up the American community. That struggle has often brought pain and violence. There it is again, pain and violence. It is not yet over, he says. The struggle, it is not yet over. Does that sound like today? Is he talking about the struggle to keep Black boys alive long enough to become men? Is that what Johnson was referring to, the struggle? And we're still there in this struggle? Is it the struggle to keep Black men out of prison and alive long enough to flourish in life? Is this the struggle that comes through pain and violence? Is it the struggle to support Black mothers in staying alive when we're looking at maternal mortality in this country, and Black maternal mortality 3 to 4 times the rate of white? Is that the struggle that he was talking about all back then? Or is it the struggle just to keep Black infants alive? So still today, we're looking at the great and growing disparity among Black infant mortality. So is that the struggle he was talking about? But today, we're also talking about this struggle to support Black mothers breastfeeding. And instead of scratching our heads, oh my God, why are the rates so low? Check out the history, because I think there's some insight from our past that lets us know what happened and what is happening now. There are 3 other points that he made in that address. One, he said, but freedom is not enough. You do not wipe away the scars of century by saying, now you're free to go about where you want and do what you desire and choose the leaders you do. These are the words that he said in this address. Powerful. In 1965, he also said, you don't take a person who for years has been hobbled by chains and liberate him, bring him to the starting line of a race, and then say, you're free to compete with all the others and still justly believe that you have been completely fair. This is where our work is today, because nothing has happened to really advance this thought from 1965. And the third point he made, I wanted to bring out, this is not enough. This is not enough just to open the gates of opportunity. Go talk about access, access, access. Is it just about opening up the door of opportunity? All of your citizens must have the ability to walk through those gates. And this is where America has failed Black people in this country, because since 1965, and then the Moynihan Report came out, which also brought some truths out there and really pointed to action, but we did no action. We did not do right even after that report. He talked about the causes of inequality, knowing the reasons of that. Negroes are trapped in poverty. We see that today. Second cause, much more difficult to explain, more deeply grounded, more desperate in its force. It is the devastating heritage of long years of slavery. There it is, people. This interruption of Black family life because of the heritage or legacy of slavery and a century of oppression, hatred, and injustice. And LBJ is gone, but we can let him know that that oppression, that hatred, that injustice has continued right up until 2021. And what's really most revealing for me and stuck with me because of this family breakdown, because that's what we're talking about. We want families to support our moms and dads and our children. It is about family. Okay, so the breakdown of the Negro family structure is what he talked about. And the most part, he said, for this, most of all, white America must accept responsibility. But no one wants to take responsibility for what happened. But there is someone who's responsible, right? And so it flows from, again, the centuries of oppression and persecution of the Negro man and those long years of degradation and discrimination, right? Which have attacked his dignity. And if you talk to men of color and Black men in particular in this country, they will talk to you about how laws and systems emasculate, take away their dignity, doesn't give them a right and a position to even take care of their families, disgracing them in front of family and community, etc. It's not anything new. It was happening back then, literally assaulting men's and fathers' ability to produce for his family. As family is a cornerstone of society, not having an opportunity to establish a family, being prevented from that through violence and brutality, that can break you. And that's personal to me, because I cannot imagine someone would have stopped me from being married to Angela over 34 years and having this great son, Colton, at 28, that I fight every day to work hard to provide for. If I had been denied that right, that privilege, I would have been so broken. How do you stand in the midst of that? So what about the fathers, the Black fathers, right? We haven't talked about them in this scenario. in breastfeeding, the shame, the trauma, the oppression, the pain that they have to endure as they had to watch their partners, the mothers of their children, being snatched away and brought into the master's house to nurse the master's baby and not their own? What about them who watch their women be raped and beat on and still had to nurse the baby? Can you imagine being violated sexually, and then also you still have to go perform and make the pancakes, clean up the kitchen, and do all of that? You couldn't dare say, "Hey, I'm tired. I've been nursing your baby all day. I need a break." They didn't have any breaks. The brutality was atrocious. So we have to involve men, the partners. We have to acknowledge him. Our systems in maternal child health, women, infant, and children, we just don't see him because we've rendered him invisible. But we have to involve men in this work. We have to acknowledge that he exists and that he also has value to add. And at this point, I also want to lift up Wesley Bugg and those folks at Rose and Robe and the work that he's doing, and including men in this work around breastfeeding. Again, we think of what happens on the plantation. It was brutal, as I said, but again, there are centuries of this brutality and the laws that really concretized slavery. And slavery was found, it made it very hard to form families, denying Black legal rights, couldn't even marry each other. So I talk about interrupting an opportunity to form a family. You couldn't even marry folks. And this is a great snippet from a writing that I came across, The Life of a Slave by Harriet Jacobs. And I won't take all the time to read, but you can read it as I'm just saying a couple of things about it. But she describes her brother and her father and her brother. And the brother ended up doing something, and the master called his name, and the father called his name. And the little Black boy's like, well, who do I answer as a slave? Do I answer my daddy or do I answer the master? And of course, he answered the master. And then the father in the bottom part says, you are my child, said the father. And when I call you, you should come immediately if you have to pass through fire and water. Isn't that powerful? But really, what would have happened in that situation in slavery when your own boy had to deny your voice to the voice of the master? Life as a slave was hard. Taken from your homeland, put on a ship, cross an ocean you'd never crossed, onto unfamiliar land. History lets us know, there's enough literature that lets you know what life was like on the slave ship itself. Lying in your feces and vomit. You got sick and died, thrown overboard. The women were violated constantly. Some of them would mutilate themselves and jump off the boats just to avoid being violated day in and day out by the sailors. They were called ebony wood on the ship. Getting here was also a life or death situation. So let's look in our country at the maternal child health system. So you see 1619, I've been talking about first enslavement of Black folks. That's one timeline to look at, 1619 through every 100 years. But in our country in 1912, we had the Children's Bill was established, but in 1935 is the beginning of MCH. And there's so many different programs that have happened, different things that have happened in the laws. But another way to look for fathers where they were not, where Black people were where they were not, where Black people benefit where they did not, is to look at these timelines, especially in MCH. Many of the benefits afforded to all women now were not available to Black women in domestics. And we know that when it comes to the welfare system, you need to know that history too, because they actually, Black women and domestics were not able to even take advantage of that when it first started in the 60s. So thank goodness for the women's movement that helped us. But we have 86 years of maternal child health. We've had 56 years of civil rights and 30 years of this MCH program, Healthy Start, we talk about. We've been looking at fatherhood for about 25 years, but 5 years only, just now within Healthy Start, are we looking at fatherhood as a required component. And so this is great news for HRSA, MCHB, and the Division of Healthy Start, because this is the first time in its 30-year history that fatherhood is actually a required component to the work. So when it comes to really advancing on our breastfeeding benchmarks and the other approaches and the goals of Healthy Start, having the partners part of this is so important. And hooray for HRSA, the MCHB, that have done this. But this is the first time that fatherhood is actually a required component. Because you can talk about fatherhood all you want, but until it's really part and included and integrated into the work, then he can always be knocked off at any time. And policies and laws always knock him off. And so we're looking forward to great work over the next 5 years under Healthy Start as we look at how fathers are really included in an MCH program. Because it's absurd to think that Black men are just breeders. That we don't want to have families, that we don't want to take care of our communities. We're not just breeders. We're here to do work. Black men matter, and this the dialogue concerning our Black mothers. So he's been rendered invisible. We have to make him visible. So again, this idea, what comes from slavery, when you think about women today, it's this Black women. It's been this unmothering of Black women. So you have to kind of talk about them and render them like they're not good mothers. They don't want to be good mothers. And so the laws and policies that impede Black mothers' ability to breastfeed their children, it began in slavery. Again, it originated in the practice of removing that enslaved mom from her infant to serve the master's baby. And so this idea of a bad Black mother became the thing, and it justified the separation. She really doesn't care about her baby, so she can certainly take care of mine. And the stereotypes of Black people in general, but of Black mothers, underlies the racial disparities in breastfeeding rate in the present. So the information you've heard today, the information you hear for the rest of the conference, all of that is so relevant to, again, how we see Black mothers in this country. And there are protective factors for mom and breastfeeding, and there's protective factors for that baby. But the reality is the exposure to slavery and the conditions of enslavement was a big risk factor to all of that. And so when the milk was stolen from an enslaved mother, the other words associated with steal is dispossess, to strip, to rob, to divest, and deprive. Those are strong words, but that's what was going on when the milk was taken from the Black baby. That they were dispossessed of the opportunity. They were stripped of every opportunity to start their lives off right, and really robbed of this opportunity for a future, divested, and meaning they weren't getting, and then also things were being taken, other things were taken away, divested from them, and just deprived of something they actually have a right to. So this justice issue comes in as well. So being denied their mother's breast milk, infants were deprived of the best opportunity that we talked about earlier in the presentation. Now, you all have heard about the first African-American quadruplets, the Foltz quads, many years ago, 1946. Dr. Klenner just exploited that family. I know people are writing about it. My only question is, who's telling the story about these quads? That's important to me because, again, we have to stop other people telling the story and let people tell their own story. But nonetheless, it's important to mark here that when they were born, this doctor had created a contract with the pet milk company, and other companies came, but he did a contract with them. And these babies were, he took them under his care and gave them pet milk exclusively. So no breast milk at all. They were saying, you don't need to breastfeed. We have this pet milk. It's just as good as breast milk. In fact, it's even better. And then we talk about the formula industry, which I know Dr. Raphael talked a little bit about, but we need to pay attention to the formula industry in this world and America's role in it. Because again, when I think of poor women, poor Black women that are formula feeding their babies, I think about in Boston in my early days of working out in the field and going with families to get their formula from the store, to walk into a store and see the milk that you need locked up as if you would steal it. And so in communities like, it's just horrible when you really think about the oppression, the pain that people go through all the time, just trying to stay alive. But it's time to tell a new story about Black motherhood. And I appreciate some people are stepping back and letting Black women lead and tell those stories, because again, there's no single story. We need to hear from the experience of people. And again, I want to lift up Pete Foltz, the husband to Anna Mae, and those Foltz twins, because of what happened to them is a story that happens all the time, the exploitation that happens to Black people in this country day in and day out. Also, a few days from now, it's the birthday of these twins, and I just want to acknowledge that because it's just truth to acknowledge it. And three of them died in their mid-40s and 50s of cancer-related illnesses, and Catherine, the last one, just died at 72, I think, or 74 in 2018. But again, the lives of these, if you read about their lives, it's really something. But this milk company then went on to market to Black people. That's the thing. That took in the 40s, they were marketing to Black families, and that's when we saw even a greater drop in nursing, breastfeeding children, because many of the Black families chose to buy the pet milk or Carnation. Carnation milk I love, that's what I have in my tea. But as I'm discovering all of this, I need to find a substitute, right? I've had plain tea for the last couple of weeks. weeks. But the Carnation Milk, I thought about my grandmother, Nellie Ann Taylor, who had 9 children, had an infant loss. She didn't breastfeed. I had a conversation with my mother in preparation for this talk. Mom said no, she didn't want to breastfeed. And then so the 5 girls, my mom's sisters, none of them breastfed their child. They were told not to. And my mother, with 5 children, she was not interested in breastfeeding, and she was told that she didn't need to, because in my grandmother's house down south in Memphis, Tennessee, we had Carnation Milk, box and can. In our house growing up, we had Carnation Milk, and it was used for everything. My mother and her generation were part of that marketing scheme, and they believed in Carnation Milk. Then I said my father's mother. I said, let me look at my paternal grandmother, Lenny Mae Hubbard. Again, 7 children. She did not breastfeed. She had 3 girls. So my aunties, none of them breastfeed. And I talked with 2 of them, and they chose not to breastfeed. And my cousins who are grown and have children, also they chose not to breastfeed because it's not something they talked about and was celebrated. It's pretty powerful. And then I think of my son when he was younger. My son was born early. He was premature. He was in intensive care. And while Angela and I planned to breastfeed, she could not because of complications. And so she pumped, and I took the little bottle down to the NICHQ, and I'm feeding him. And then I'm talking to her. I said, my wife really wants to nurse. She was planning on doing that, and because of her complications, can someone help her? And they told me, it doesn't matter. The formula will be fine for the baby. Let her know she'll be okay. That's the way they treated me back then. Even though I knew that wasn't all the way true, they said they could do nothing. But so I talked with Angela's mother, who was a registered nurse, and that was a big piece. She's 86 years old now, but she told me about life before. She talking about her mom, who was her grandmother, who was also a wet nurse, an enslaved wet nurse. But even my wife's mother, 5 children, no nursing whatsoever, no breastfeeding, and all of her daughters decided not to breastfeed as well. So it's something to really look at when we look at this history. And I just want to point out, again, American support for formula industry comes at the cost of the health and lives of Black and brown babies, especially at home and abroad. Poor folks are really subject to this abuse, is what I consider, of the formula industry. So again, it's an economic thing, but we need to look at it. Black women in the United States use formula at consistently and disproportionately higher rates than anyone else. Oh my goodness. And then there's the Mammy. And you have to know what the Mammy is, who the Mammy is. But dehumanizing Black women, devaluing their motherhood, love the white children in her care, and neglected her own. And a great book by Kimberly Wallace Sanders, definitely want to check that out. So even after slavery, the Mammy culture existed, and Black women used wet nursing as the medium to sustain their livelihood. So again, movies like The Help and other places, you see that Mammy being played out. The book talks about the complexity of that dual maternity aspects. Again, devotion for the children she cares for, and disregard for her own. That became a narrative. And so those racial disparities in breastfeeding between Black and brown community, Black and white and Black communities might be attributed to some of these cultural beliefs. Again, lack of knowledge about breastfeeding, but the disparities reflect rooted and institutionalized practices of wet nursing, which began in slavery. And you'll hear about this if you don't know already, but there are 3 categories that we like to put Black women in, and women of color, is that either there's a Mammy or the Jezebel sexual, or there's just sassy sapphire. And again, beginning to the narratives around Black women, and that came, again, out of slavery. They don't have feelings, and you all know some of the lies. They don't feel pain like we do, etc. But being submissive, sexy, or sassy are the 3 reductive depictions, and I want to say reductive depictions of Black women. So you will, hopefully you're going to get a copy of this. Truth is, with no familiar history, the only cultural memory some Black women have of breastfeeding came from the echoes of slavery, again, through wet nursing. So Davos had something to say about that. Yeah, and it did not like this image of the Mammy. And again, any dignity she had was taken away once the children she raised went on to lynch her sons. And so that's a whole story about that. I want to share with you, there was a bill that was pushed forward. It didn't pass, thank goodness. But white folks, senator wanted to build a monument of a Mammy. Thank God it never came to pass, but it would have been in DC and would have been another one of those monuments we'll be fighting to tear down today, but it never made it. But there was an actual bill put forward to build a monument because Mammy was so loved. A book I want to point you to is Dr. Stephanie Jones Rogers. Definitely check out this book because, again, what was revealing for me was the relationship between white women and black women, slave women. So slave owners and slave women. So it's worth examining this historical relationship between black women and white women, because I think it plays out somewhat today. Again, that bad black mother, I'm rushing through these to get to the end. You know, just to get to the point that I'm not your mammy. That's because that's what many people want black women to be your mammy, but I'm just not your mammy. So much has been swept under the rug about the history, but it's time to really go back to look at our history in order to move forward, look back to leap forward. And I'm gonna just have images here just for you to see, but I'm gonna move to the end. So as black men and fathers, this is where we can stand strong. And I know I can stand strong, and that's with her. Support, we're part of that support. And a shout out to our doulas and midwives too. Community support is what our black women need. Black families matter. Black mothers matter. Black breastfeeding matters. And these are Sarah Paul's pictures, in case you want to know. Just wanted to say hello and lift up black women that need to be heard. Dr. Stephanie Devane Johnson, who's done a lot of research in this, but I wanted to lift her up today. I enjoyed the presentation, but I'm just acknowledging slavery's interruptions. Milk was taken, black bodies taken, black life, black families impacted. Cheers to you all. So from theirs, children, to nursing our own. That's what I'm up to. I don't know about you. We've been under-resourced, underestimated, undervalued, underserved. We've been overstudied, overburdened, and overwhelmed, and overlooked. So with cheers, thank you again today. Let's just do justice. Lifting up other great black women whose voices need to be heard. Thank you, Dr. Kimmery Bugg. Thank you, Dr. Scott, Dr. Perry, Dr. Monica Lamore. These are voices you need to be listening to. Also, Malcolm McGuire, the great article there on Health Connect 1, and lifting up Twyla Dilion as well. These are voices we need to be hearing now. Also, Dr. Kimberly Sells-Allers, great movie to look at by Brown Medical School on Black motherhood. Check out the Moynihan Report. Don't have time to get into it, but it says some very revealing things that were supposed to be acted upon in 1965 that we're still haven't done today. Pointing you also to the Moynihan Institute for Fatherhood, which took that report, highlighted where the gaps were, and now are on a quest to address some of those actions that were highlighted way back in 1965. My final thoughts are, racial injustice in America has roots in enslavement. And Brian Stevenson says, I think there's a better America still waiting. There is more just America still waiting. There's a kind of community that we haven't achieved yet, but we can't achieve it if we're unwilling to tell the truth about our past. So if you haven't, check out the new memorial there in Montgomery. For Black men, Black fathers, we move from the plantation to incarceration. Sisters, I want to lift you up. Black sisters, Indigenous sisters, Brown sisters. It's going to be courageous for many white women to make a decision to step back so that our sisters can step forward and really help us have the conversations we need to have around Black breastfeeding. Today, I did this presentation in honor of Lenny Mae Hubbard, my grandmother, who was a domestic in the early 1900s and also a child of the enslaved, child of a mother who actually was a wet nurse, I found out in preparation for today. Let's reach for something better. If we want to celebrate the triumphs of our past, we must be willing to confront the negative parts as well. So here's to the future children that will be breastfed by Black mamas. And here's to this great conference. Cheers to you all. Thank you again for having me. I appreciate it being here.
I'm gonna go ahead and clap. Thank you very much, Brother Kenn, for that. Thank you for the great words. Wanted to mention I'm a proud mentee of yours, and based on the chat, you have a lot more coming. So we do have one question that we might have time for. What do you think is the first step in creating an inclusive environment for fathers? So now what would your thought be first step if this is the one question you get to answer?
Yeah, is the first step. I immediately thought of a circle, a group of people, and my immediate thought then was to open up the circle and let him come in and embrace him. So that's came to mind immediately. He has to be welcomed in. So create a space and place for him to come in.
Okay. Thank you. And right now, that's all we have time for. I hope you get to see the chat. So hopefully we'll be able to save a very rich discussion in there. A lot of people knew the foods that they were receiving and mentioned a lot of that. So a lot of substitutes and things that people mentioned. So I do have to mention for everyone that there will be a working lunch. Everyone should be able to see the invites through the agenda. We invite you all to join that. Also at 1:30 Eastern time, there'll be a dance break and sessions, the concurrent sessions, the first round will start at 1:45 Eastern time. So 1:45 concurrent sessions, 1:30, everybody can get their dance on. And I'm guessing right now, at the conclusion of this, you all should be able to go into the working lunch if you all registered for that.